Alright, my name is William Chu, and today I'm going to discuss the Bush era tax cuts. As we all know, that Obama is trying to decide whether to extend the tax cuts. So my major claim is letting the tax cuts expire will further increase economic troubles, and I'll discuss what are the Bush era tax cuts, which class that the tax cuts will affect the most, and how much the tax cuts will affect the families if it expires, and also how it affects the upper class as well. So, what are the Bush era tax cuts? In 2001, Bush passed a law that created the tax cuts, and individual income tax that had 15% were lowered 5% to 10%, and individuals with 28% tax rates were reduced to 15%, and individuals with income tax rates 31% were reduced to 25%, 36% to 28%, 39.6 to 35%. And he also included child tax credits, which were increased from $500 to $1,000, and he phased in reduction to estate taxes. In 2003, he passed a pro-growth tax cut, and capital gain rates were cut from 20% to 15%. Top individual rates on dividends were cut from 35% to 15%. And tax cuts towards middle class helps stimulate the economy. I think that the middle class is affected most by the tax cuts because the middle class is such an ambiguous class. It ranges from 25,000 to 100 grand for their income. With the tax cuts, the middle class will have extra money to spend, and which will further help the economy. And expiring tax cuts affect families because how would these tax cuts affect the families? Chuck Marr, a director of federal tax policies for the Center on Budget and Policy, once said, "As a general matter, everybody is affected by taxes, except for certain seniors. All taxpayers have something at stake." Well, in order to demonstrate this, I calculated how the tax cuts would affect the lower class, and I divided the middle class into 3 sections because it's such a big class. So, if an individual made $12,500 a year, and the tax cuts were extended, they would pay $725, and if the tax cuts do expire, it will be $862. If the tax cuts expire, this is an increase of $137, which is 16% increase. And in order to divide the middle class, I divided the classes into a range of lower middle class, mid middle class, and upper middle class. And lower middle class would range from $25,000 to $50,000 income, and the average individual I calculated it for was $37,500. If the tax cuts do extend, they would end up paying $4,000.716, and if it does expire, it's $5,435. And this is an increase of $719, which is a 14% increase. For the middle class, the middle class is 50,000 to 75,000, and I used an income of 62,500. And if the tax cuts are extended, it would be $11,261. And if it does expire, it's $12,000 and $12,441. This is an increase of $1,000 in 180, and it's a 10% increase. For the upper middle class, I chose 75,000 to 100,000, and the income I used was 87,500. If it was to be extended, it would be $17,266, and if it expired, it was $19,202. This is an increase of 11%, and which would be 1,936. These tax cuts affect upper class as well, even though they make enough to have extra cash for expenditures. The Bush tax cuts of 2001 was hugely beneficial for the upper class because without the tax extensions, the personal exemption phased out, which allowed the upper class, which are high income filers, to deduct the full value of their personal exemptions and itemized deductions. And if it does expire, it potentially costs wealthy households as a whole $21 billion. And in conclusion, expired tax cuts will affect everyone, because if you pay taxes, you have to pay for them, and on average, it's an increase of 10% in taxes.
All right, the phrasing on the proposition is confusing. I'm not quite sure at the beginning whether or not you think we need the tax cuts to continue or whether the continuation of the tax cuts is unnecessary. The longer I listen, it sounds like you're making the inference that there will be some harmful economic consequence if we allow the tax cuts to expire. So then you've got this long section at the end where you are calculating out what the average group would be paying in these different categories. That just goes on and on and on, and I think you've got a nice summary statement that says ultimately taxpayers are going to be paying $21 billion more in taxes as a consequence of this. You could break that down into particular categories and say this group will be paying $15 billion more, this group will be paying $5 billion more, this group will be paying $3 billion more, whatever the numbers turned out to be, and could have saved us all of those individualized examples. Too much of the speech sounds like an informative speech outlining what the tax cuts were and how they would work in an average case, and I'm still trying to figure out what's the inference. So if taxes go up 10% for everybody, so what? Is that good for the economy, good for tax revenues, bad for the economy, bad for tax revenues? What's the long-term consequence I don't get an inference on that, and that's the part of the speech that's most frustrating. I got a long lesson on what the tax cuts consist of, but I didn't get much of an argument about what it all means, what the impact is going to be on growth, on jobs, on the overall health of the economy, and that seems to be where the dispute is on this subject. All right.